He was driving, working the highways to outrun the pain life had carved into him. The death of his wife, the distance from his children. But on this road, a Brazilian entity crossed borders to devour what was left of his soul. Strap in and meet the Corpo Seco. Let's get into the story.
The Corpo Seco fable is a deeply ingrained part of Brazilian mythology that is whispered over bonfire edges and passed down in low voices. They claim that he was such a harsh and evil man that even the ground turned away his body when he passed away. A man who was condemned to roam the living world, rotting above ground, and draining the life power of everyone who happened to come into contact with. Most people write it off as myth, a story meant to frighten kids or amuse them on stormy evening. However, legends are not usually anchored in one location, much like sea. The wind carries some of them. Some people go across ocean, and some unexpectedly drive right into your path. Legends were not something Raymond Keller believed. He was a believer in distance, diesel, and gears. Raymond lived on the road, a seasoned truck driver who had watched 2 decades pass by through rearview mirrors and windshield. He lived in a rig that was capable of carrying more than simply freight. The only thing that resembled a heartbeat to him was the rumble of the engine. His comfort, sports scores, and vintage country tunes are whispered into the void of the night by the static-filled buzz of an AM radio. His sole friend? I'm sorry. Sorry for children who grew up too quickly, for a wife who was buried too early, and for all the things he never had the courage to say. He was getting closer to a past he couldn't bear with each mile he traveled. Somewhere in the wide isolation of New Mexico, on one of these long hauls, Raymond made a choice he would never be able to reverse. He decided to take an old state road, a thin, unsigned ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through forgotten landscape, after encountering a detour and a GPS error. He hadn't seen it on any map. However, it had the appearance of a shortcut, and shortcuts were always alluring, particularly if you've spent your entire life jogging. The road seemed just odd at first. Quiet, left behind. As though the desert had held its breath and exhaled, the air felt heavy. Like weary-limbed, power lines drooped. Road signs were so worn that they had been erased. Raymond swore that every few miles he caught a glimpse of something moving where nothing should. Then he noticed it. A number. Gone, like dried leather, stretched thin, on the shoulder, not moving, gazing. Its stare was full, but its eyes were hollow. Not maliciously, something more profound, older. Raymond continued. He was unable to. However, he felt a chill settle in his stomach, and his hands shook a little on the steering wheel. It was the first time, not the last, though. It wasn't just a haunting that happened next. There was an unraveling. He trusted the rig more than most, but it started to malfunction in ways that were illogical. A slurred, Old Portuguese that reverberated with grief was one of the voices that came over the radio, speaking in tongues he didn't know but nonetheless understood. No matter how many windows he opened, the stench of rot started to permeate the cab, and the figure, began to resurface at stops for relaxation. In the rear-view mirror, he would occasionally look sideways in the middle of the night and notice it sitting in the passenger, still and silent as though it had always been there. However, Raymond didn't see anything frightening. It was in his emotion. Despite the lengthy hours, his thoughts started to skew. Time was hazy. The days blended into one another. After blinking, he would be 50 kilometers away from his previous memory. Twisted memories. His children's faces started to fade from his memory. The name of his wife escaped his lips like smoke. Her eyes were black and empty, like the dead that followed him. But he occasionally saw her in dreams that permeated the real world. It wasn't insane. He was aware of that. This was neither sleep deprivation nor paranoia. For years, he had driven through weeks, nights, and storms with hardly a wink. This was not like the others. He was being fed by something. His soul, not just his body. Like a parasite, something ancient and evil had taken hold of him, and it wasn't satisfied with killing him. It desired his spirit, his recollection, his humanity. Furthermore, it was assimilating into him rather than merely following him. Raymond's voyage became a spiral of bewilderment and horror, a waking nightmare. He attempted to get off the road. He attempted to go back. Every route he took him back to the same patch of forgotten desert and the same damaged highway. But the GPS was worthless and the maps were false. And the figure waited everywhere, at every turn, observing, with inevitable, not urgent, feeling. as though it had had endless time, as though it had spent centuries waiting for this moment, since the Corpo Secco was never laid to rest. It was never intended to be at rest. Movement was its curse, migration, feeding. It had now discovered a new continent, a land full of souls who were too exhausted to resist. The first of these was not Raymond Keller. He wouldn't be the last, either. America is home to thousands of roadways, miles of highways leading to nowhere. Once bustling with life, the forgotten passageways were now suffocated by silence. And occasionally you may sense it when the air is too still and the night is too silent, when your radio crackles and your engine stutters. A presence, a hunger, something intangible but unquestionable, is riding with you, awaiting your attention, or worse, forget who you are. It's more than a ghost story. It serves as a warning, because legends don't always remain buried. Some curses have no boundaries, and once you're on a certain road, you can't get off. Therefore, don't stop the next time you encounter a man on the side of the road who is skinny, motionless, and has eyes like tombs while you are driving alone, far from cities and cell towers. Don't double-check. Additionally, avoid inviting him inside at all costs. He's inside already. The fear wasn't the hardest thing. The familiarity was the reason. There was a nagging feeling that what Raymond was going through wasn't unfamiliar. Rather, it seemed familiar, like something ingrained in the world's very foundation, something inherited and old. Too real to deny, yet too black to identify. That understanding grew with every mile, and every look at his mirror evoked the face of a stranger, emaciated, pale, with the eyes somewhat sunken. He appeared older and weaker, as though something was eroding him from the inside out, one memory at a moment, rather than just from weariness. He made an effort to resist. He did, of course. He switched the radio off. He averted his gaze from the mirrors. He even tried sleeping in motels on the side of the road, but each time he closed his eyes, the dreams came. Really, more like visits than dreams. He would end up standing in odd places, like nameless graveyards, starless deserts, and endless back road. And it stood, always, at the border of the dreamscape, observing. Be patient. Since what it did wasn't personal, there was no animosity in its gaze. It was instinct, hunger. In the same manner that water chisels stone or fire eats wood. Raymond missed a whole day somewhere in the distance between Alamogordo and Roswell. When the sun came back up, he was parked on the shoulder, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, and the engine was cold. There was nothing in his logbook. He had spoiled his thermos, and he gazed at the horizon, bloodshot and unfocused, as though he were waiting for it to speak. Time is everything to a truck driver, including routes, schedules, and delivery windows. However, Raymond's universe was now disengaged. Time stopped moving forward. It made a loop. It fell on top of itself. He was no longer traversing the terrain by car. It was taking over him. Even if there weren't many of them, the residents he passed along the road avoided eye contact. The employees at the gas station rushed through his transaction. At a diner, a waitress backed away and left his coffee on the counter. Not because of the face, but rather because of the shadow behind it. He once saw his reflection in a store window and failed to identify the man staring back. An almost imperceptible tall, narrow shape that resembles smoke or heat shimmer. However, it tracked his movements exactly. Behind him, it wasn't standing. He was a part of it. And that makes you wonder, what would you do if you saw a figure like that in your own reflection? Would you look away, or would you stare, hoping to recognize what's staring back? Let me know in the comments, because some mirrors don't reflect who you are. They reveal who you're becoming. And hey, if this story is giving you chills, or making you think twice about your next road trip, consider checking out another one of our unsettling tales. There's always another shadow waiting just beyond the headlight. Raymond's thoughts became more somber as the days passed. His thoughts ached from desperation, yet he was unable to call for assistance. Who would he call? Would he say anything at all? On a highway in the desert, something from a Brazilian legend is haunting me. That sounded familiar to him. He wasn't insane. Perhaps the worst part, though, was realizing this and being powerless to avoid it. Whether you believed or not didn't matter to the Corpo Secco. It had no desire for faith. It desired to give up. He heard it breathing one night while he was parked close to a long-abandoned railway bridge. Not the wind, not creatures. Inhaling, slow, deliberate, and ragged, like there was someone inches away from his ear. Anticipating the vacant passenger seat, he turned. However, it wasn't empty this time. In the faint illumination of the dashboard lights, the figure was clearly visible as it sat there. Not sturdy, not spectral, something halfway, like leather that has been squeezed too tightly. Its skin adhered to its bone. Something living swirled within its eyes, which were pits of shadow. Even worse, it regarded him like a reflection rather than prey. A mirror, one of the memory. Raymond was unable to yell, unable to move, not out of fear, but out of surrender, because something inside of him knew the truth. They had picked him, not at random, not by chance. With each mile traveled in resentment, each regret unfulfilled, and each heartache never put to rest, he had brought this curse upon himself. The Corpo Secco did more than simply pursue evil. It came after emptiness, wounds that did not go away, souls neglected, and despite his steel and tenacity, Raymond had turned into a hollow man. His automobile started up smoothly the following morning. The sun rose over the hills of New Mexico, golden and beautiful. Birds sang. Civilization came back. However, he had vanished. In other words, his skin was worn by something else. Operated his truck. When asked, he gave his name. However, it was no longer Raymond Keller. Other truckers occasionally bring him up. A man operating a rig without a license plate is mentioned. No name of the business. Even when summoned, the CB radio never stops being silent. He never fully looks you in the eye. Always going along roads that are no longer used. Never alone. Strange things also happen everywhere he goes. Radios picking up stations that haven't broadcast in decades. Livestock discovered dead, and electrical problem. In Texas, a man claimed to have seen a truck idling by the side of the road with the headlights still on and a human sitting motionless in the cab for hours. Although the Corpo Secco mythology originated in Brazil, its famine knows no bound. It looks for the injured as well as the evil, the wandering as well as the dead. Additionally, there are a lot of routes in America where people like Raymond's get lost for a long time before they disappear, where suffering rages while there is still darkness. Take a deep breath the next time your truck swerves onto a path that isn't marked on the map and your GPS goes dark. Don't forget what you didn't say. Recall your current self. Thus you might not be alone yourself. Don't wait for an invitation, some passenger. They were by your side no matter what. Awaiting the quiet. Waiting for your name to be forgotten by the road. You will drive forever after that, exactly like him. Dead at the wheel. Only in the curse are they alive. Oh ChatGPTs. However, curses are silent. They mutter. Before it's too late to distinguish between them, they blend in with the everyday and slightly alter the ordinary to make it seem almost correct. Raymond Keller, or what was left of him, continued to roll. His truck was the beating heart of something older, darker, and infinitely patient, and the highways became into vain. He had lost his sense of direction. He was the voyage itself, the buzz of sorrow across 1,000 empty miles, the gradual decline of optimism into shadow. His name started to be called again at truck stops throughout the Southwest. Silently, anonymously, stories circulate with uneasiness rather than urgency. A rig that was always gas-free. A motorist who never slept, ate, or talked. During night shifts, some claim to have seen him parked just out of sight, barely visible past the final operational floodlight. Others said that just before he showed up, they heard murmurs in the static of their radios, muttering in a language they couldn't comprehend but that seemed eerily familiar, like a lullaby sung by something that had never slept. He continued to drive. The roads were altered. The seasons changed. Towns grew and grew. However, Raymond's course remained unchanged. That abandoned New Mexico road had become into his purgatory and axe. The road constantly drew him back, even when he occasionally ventured far, up into the parched Arizona plateaus or into the deeper south. As though he were bound by something much more binding, perhaps memory, rather than wheels and gasoline, or shame. The drivers he came into contact with were never the same. For weeks, they would describe having terrible blazing dreams about endless deserts, arid winds that echoed their deepest thoughts, and skeletal men standing guard atop far-off dune. According to one woman, she saw her dead brother sitting in Raymond's passenger seat, staring straight ahead with dead eyes eyes and hardly moving lips as he repeatedly mouthed her name. After following Raymond's truck for 30 miles on a rainless night, another guy gave up driving completely. He claimed that every picture of his truck taken that night included a second face, sunken and gray, next to his own, and that the stench of decay stuck to his clothes for days. Folklorists and those interested in the paranormal started to pay attention. They made the connection. They claimed that the Corpo Secco was never intended to remain buried in Brazilian territory. Something as brittle as geography wouldn't hold a soul so tainted, so savagely cut off from human empathy. Because myths are temporary prisons for facts too wild to label, it had infiltrated, and the truth spills out when the container shattered. The Corpo Secco had pursued suffering. Grief had preceded it, and it had discovered a wandering sailboat in Raymond. The fact that the curse had taken him was perhaps not the most horrifying aspect. The reason was that he had embraced it. Raymond was ultimately pulled into the abyss by something other than claws, teeth, or shackle. It was sadness. Years passed during which there was silence and the dull, protracted pain of loneliness. He never sobbed in public, never sought assistance, and never thought his soul was valuable enough to be saved. When darkness falls, that type of man doesn't scream. He opens the door. He offers to take the wheel. What about the Corpo Secco? It doesn't happen by accident. It waits for a man's heart to open up enough for them to pass through. Now the story comes up every time a vehicle vanishes into thin air, or a rig is discovered idle in the middle of nowhere with no driver inside, no footprints in the dust, and no indications of fight. Someone recalls every time a faint, guttural voice in a dialect that hasn't been heard in more than a century is picked up by an ancient CB radio. A shudder goes through someone. The story is repeated by someone. The dead walk, they claim. However, some people are driven indefinitely. Additionally, avoid looking in the mirror if you ever find yourself on an unmarked road, in the dense darkness of a desert midnight, far from cities and stars, and you feel as though something has just passed through you. Avoid looking at the rear seat. When the radio starts to hiss, avoid reaching for it, as he's around. Additionally, drive more quickly if you begin to sense a weight behind your eyelid, an unidentified grief, or the sensation that your memories are sliding through your fingers like sand. However, keep in mind that speed won't save you, due to the Corpo Secco's lack of pursuit. It waits. Be patient. Eternal. Just off the road's shoulder. And you'll see him one day after you've traveled too far, slept too little, and lost too much. Standing beneath a skewed electrical wire. Initially, just a form, then a face. Not upset, not nice, empty. Awaiting your cessation. I'm waiting for you to lose your identity. Awaiting the time when you think he's you. You'll join him when you do. One more driver with no history. On the roadway, another ghost. In Diesel and Fear, another name was murmured. Behind the wheel, another stillness. Oh, ChatGPT discussion. The desert is said to never forget. Yes, it buries. It swallows roads. It covers bones, it erases footsteps, but it never forgets. Everything that goes through it is weighed down by it. And the road is still waiting somewhere in that boundless expanse of sand and quiet. That route. Raymond Keller accepted it without question, without knowing, without thinking. The one never supposed to be discovered. Drivers continue to discover it. Not too often, not each year, but enough. Enough to sustain the narrative. The legend's breath, dry and rasping like the wind through a cracked windshield, was sufficient. Every time, it begins in the same manner. A shortcut, a side trip, a malfunction with the GPS. A feeling of being drawn toward a section of asphalt that appears on no map yet feels correct, as if it has always existed and is simply waiting to be remembered. It entices them in this way, not with threats, with acknowledgement, because the Corpo Secco preys on the forgotten rather than the scared, the overworked. They are hollowed-out souls with unpaid bills and unspoken word. Raymond is liked by many. People drive to get away, not to get there. Individuals who have more ghosts in their hearts than in their rearview mirror. And they are unaware that they have crossed a boundary when they arrive at that road, when the air changes and the light appears to fade even in the middle of the day, into a presence rather than a location. And they're not by themselves after that. Some people object, before the first illusion occurs, before the radio switches languages, and before the stench of rotten worms seeps into the air conditioning vents, they realize something is amiss and turn around. The fortunate ones are those who still have a glimmer of optimism and believe that danger is imminent, to remain concerned. Others, though, they continue to drive. They embrace the fear. They think it's something they know. They are unaware that what they are experiencing is resonance rather than recognition. The sound of something within them that is equal to the hunger of the object observing from the side of the road. What about the corpo secco? It is not required to pursue them. It waits. It waits in the stillness, in the mirrors, in the transitional spaces between awake and sleep, between memory and forgetfulness. It observes them gently and delectably as they start to lose their names, faces, and birthdays. They begin to hear sounds that nobody else can hear. At strange hours, their trucks start to quake. Uncertain of where they stopped last night, or whether they stopped at all, they wake up with dust in their lungs and mud on their boots. Raymond Keller was only the first step. The first to cross the ocean with the curse. The first to give it a driving wheel and an open roadway while carrying that ancient rot in his bone. He won't be the last, though. These is because legends like these change throughout time. They adjust. Beneath steel and chrome, what formerly walked barefoot through the jungle now hum. Antennas and engine blocks now whisper what used to groan through treetops. The corpo secco is no longer just a ghost. Now it's a system, a circuit, an infection that spreads by presence rather than touch. Via resonance, it haunts more than just individual. Turns into them, and they turn into it. Sure, there are indications. If you are aware of what to see. At daybreak, a truck parked a bit too motionless. A rig where the same gas station is never used twice. A motorist that never looks you in the eye, blinks, or says anything. Simply drive. Never-ending night, never-ending kilometers. And the stench always behind him. Similar to sour beef. Similar to flowers left on a grave for too long. People occasionally attempt to pursue him. Out of interest. Out of sympathy. Out of some stupid, desperate curiosity. They always feel bad about it. They lose their radio. Their headlights go out. They can't explain the vibrations that make their tires hum. They also spot him somewhere along the route. Not only Raymond, the object in the chair next to him. The shriveled form that is more shadow than flesh. Observing, studying, getting ready. Because it no longer simply drains. It attracts new members. It grows. Others are now the subject of rumors. Trucks driving in pairs or threes can be spotted traversing the oil-slick plains of West Texas or the forgotten backroads of Louisiana. Drivers who don't smile but wave. Convoys that go by without illumination and with motors that are too quiet for their speed. Towns where trucks halt early have staff members who place talismans on the doors and refuse to talk about what they have witnessed. There are spots where the road appears older than the nearby town, with cracks that resemble scars or veins. There is a gathering, according to some, that whatever darkness started in the soul of a heartbroken trucker in Brazil and caught a ride over the seas is spreading. That something, a network, a highway of the dam, is being constructed by the corpo secco. An endless path of suffering and atonement, paved with quiet and remembrance rather than asphalt. Some claim it is irrelevant, because you will drive that road if it is your destiny. It will locate you on a night when you're too exhausted to function normally, when your chest feels overly burdened by everything you've lost, when your phone dies and your map malfunctions. You see a road that you swear has never been there before yet nevertheless feels familiar. You'll turn to. You'll accept it, because you'll know in your heart there's something waiting, something that keeps you in mind, something that has been driving next to you the entire time. Furthermore, the world behind you won't vanish when you turn onto that road, that forgotten sun-bleached scar that winds through an area too quiet for comfort. It will remain in that location. However, you will begin to falter, slowly, like dust slipping through time's crevices, like a voice dying from a nearly remembered dream. The change won't happen overnight. The corpo secco does not operate that way. It's not a jump fright on the side of the road or a scream in the dark. It happens gradually. Be patient. One thread at a time, it pulls you apart. It will be kilometers before you notice that the trees have ceased to grow. that there are no more birds or other indications of life. There is only silence and that weird pressure in the air, like if something massive is breathing behind the clouds, out of sight. Unaware of the reason, you'll look at your mirrors more frequently. You'll think that anything has changed in your taxi because a seatbelt that wasn't fastened is suddenly loose. As though a slender, bony hand had rested there, there was a smear on the passenger side window. Even while it is off, your CB radio will crackle. It will first be static, whispers followed, then a name, not yours. However, you are aware of one you didn't realize you knew. A name that evokes a strong, unresolved feeling in your stomach. And you'll realize that this goes beyond your current location. It has to do with who you were. Because the real tragedy of the Corpo Secco is that roads aren't the only places it haunts. Regret is haunted by it, consumes the things we bury within ourselves, not in graveyard. We swallowed all of the anguish, the guilt we choose not to bear. Our loved ones passed away too soon. The world taught us to man up, keep moving, and get over it, so we suppressed those aspects of ourselves. However, suffering seldom goes unnoted. It waits, it develops teeth, and it drives when it is powerful enough. The sightings have been explained away by others. Legends from the city. Heat-induced delusion. A trick of long-distance loneliness and tiredness. However, the storylines are too similar, too detailed. The old road, the passing of time, the stench of decay, and the person with eyes like open graves are all recurring themes in all of the accounts. Even among the more superstitious truckers, there is a current idea that the Corpo Secco is not limited to haunting highway. It's the highway, no human, no more, but a route, a power, a recollection engraved on pavement, driven onward by the wheels of anyone who is sufficiently devoid to be further hollowed out. They claim that it spreads around the continent like a live virus, showing up only to those it chooses. You can't find it. You can't. It locates you. Truckers who disappear are occasionally discovered weeks later, hundreds of miles from their last known destination, lost and confused on country roads, unable to recall how they got there. They remain silent when questioned about what transpired. They simply appear worn out. Not drowsy, worn out. It was as if stillness had taken the place of something that had been dully scraped out of them. Some people never talk again. Some resume driving, but never alone, never at night, and never with crosses zip-tied to the dash, rosaries, or salt. Some are never discovered at all. What about their rig? Occasionally, those rigs continue to move. The same vehicle, the same rust pattern, the same burned-out taillight. Always silent, always by itself, always on routes no one else dares to take. Sightings come in from states far and wide. A shaky, flickering video even shows one of these vehicles driving by a toll booth without the driver visible. Just before the system malfunctioned and went down for hours, the camera captured it. The most disturbing aspect, though, the rig's license plate belonged to a driver who passed away 20 years prior. The legend evolves with its dissemination. It's not only truckers anymore. In the vicinity of forgotten highways, hikers disappear. Although there isn't a road close by, campers can hear distant, low rumbling engines. During a vacation in Nevada, one couple even said that their GPS misled them, taking them directly into a quiet valley where their car died and the air became too heavy to breathe. They claim to have spotted a figure observing from down the street. They don't discuss what transpired afterward. Simply put, they advise against relying on quick cuts, due to the fact that some roads were not designed for driving. They were designed to be taken. Furthermore, the Corpo Secco is more than simply a myth. No more. It's a destination, a result, a ghost that floats on the exhaust fumes of all the broken men who have ever muttered, "I have nothing left." Therefore, if you ever find yourself on a road you have never been on before, far from laughing and light, and you suddenly feel the want to take a turn you don't remember making, halt, leave. Despite the fact that it may take all night, even if you have bleeding feet, since if you don't, you see that person standing off in the distance, that creature with the skin of old parchment and a craving for memory as well as blood that waits by the side of the road, it won't remain upright for very long. It'll slide into the back seat. The door will be closed. Then, you'll be the driver, and you'll keep going. And the hush is perfect at that point. It's a silence that notices you, not the kind you notice. The kind where something else is there in addition to the lack of noise. Something old. Something that has a deeper sense of hearing than the human ear could ever have. Like a memory you were never supposed to remember. It envelopes you in your lungs like dust, and that silence remains unbroken as the kilometers pass beneath your tires. It percolates. Even the familiar grumble of the engine, which used to reassure you, begins to sound off. Empty. Reverberating in inappropriate ways. It is still operational. It continues to move. However, it now has a rhythm beneath it, as if something were breathing through the cylinder. There was an exhale coming from the vent, something that mimics your heartbeat until you are unable to distinguish between a machine and yourself. That's how the corpo secco takes the last of you, your rhythm, not your body or spirit, your humanity. Because you are no longer a human once you lose the sense of meaningful stillness, laughing, wind through leaves, and someone calling your name. You are a vessel, an echo, a moving rig with a curse in the cab and a corpse at the wheel. You will nevertheless occasionally see other drivers. They won't see you though. Alternatively, they will. Additionally, their instincts will tell them that the truck in the adjacent lane is incorrect, and they will swiftly turn away, suddenly doubtful of what they observe, that the light and its shadow are different, that the person driving is not breathing, blinking, or otherwise alive. They will also continue to drive, quick, frantically trying to escape, despite the fact that they will sense the unseen cord connecting them to you, tugging, whispering. The problem is that the corpo secco no longer pursued. It makes a call. It becomes familiar once it's inside of you, and comfort comes from the familiar. And the road will never tell a more hazardous lie than comfort. It's not mercy if you start to forget what suffering feels like. Possession is that. You'll lose sight of who you were, who you loved, and who you lost. What takes its place, though, is worse. The feeling that something else is dressing up as your life, performing the routine, operating your rig, placing your name on the sign at checkpoint, recording miles that are no longer yours. And you might catch a glimpse of your eyes if, by some horrible miracle, you are ever stopped at a rest stop and find yourself looking at your own reflection in the dark window glass of your rig. Not red from lack of sleep, not clouded with exhaustion, but devoid, empty. Then you'll realize that the corpo secco desired more than just your life. You weren't there. The void you left behind, the ghost space took on your shape, since it currently resides there, where it is driven. And the road, that accursed conduit that cuts through plains, marshes, mountains, and deserts, will continue to grow, silently, invisible, one quick fix at a time, one wandering spirit, one damaged man, and one neglected woman at a time. You see, there is no longer any vocabulary for this curse. Not in Portuguese, not in English. It communicates through loss, through the steering wheel's well-known weight, through fuel and the scent of old leather. It whispers just low enough that you lean in and listen through the unsettling static of a dead radio. And so it starts. That's the end of it. And between, only a few miles. Miles and miles of flame. The kind that disregards time. Since you no longer have a home, they don't lead home. The kind that never really started, therefore they never really end. They waited for the proper driver everywhere, awaiting the appropriate wound. And it's waiting once more now, because there will be someone who misses a turn tonight. Their GPS will stop working. At precisely 3:07 a.m., their phone's battery will run out. They'll have an odd urge to go down a side road that they claim wasn't there the day before. They will, too. They will slide along a section of damaged asphalt when the moon is hidden behind stationary cloud. On the side of the road, they will spot a figure that is motionless and not waving, simply observing. And if they notice what's there, if they look too long, it's too late already. Because authorization is not required for the corpo secco. All it needs is suffering. Furthermore, we all bear suffering, particularly when we're driving alone. And it's easy to get in touch with those who drive alone. The quiet is no longer questioned. The deviations are not resisted. Long nights and more regrets have been accepted. They've learned to cope with the pain of losing what they had, or worse, never having had the opportunity to possess. And the corpo secco enters the picture there, nor with aggression, nor with terror, but with acknowledgement. It interprets the vacant passenger seat as an invitation rather than a vacancy. A gaping hole next to the driver's grief, ready to be filled. The little things are where everything begins. Despite the heater being on full blast, the cab was cold. It smelled mild at first, like something ancient, like something buried, and like dry dirt. The rear-view mirror started tilting by itself. Even when the radio is switched off, it crackles. Then there are the guttural, low whispers that use words you've never learnt yet nevertheless recognize. You're not afraid of them, not initially, since they seem comforting. They resemble memory. They have a familiar sound. However, that is the trap, because you're hearing from somewhere other than your house. It belongs to him. The Corpo Secco is not a vengeful ghost. It is haunted by need, with desire. It must be housed in a vessel that understands what it's like to miss something so profoundly that it leaves a soul scar. There is no turning back once it finds you and presses its hunger against your sorrow like a match to dry tinder. The highway becomes a part of you, a portion of his voyage. The dark tide that now covers continents began with Raymond Keller, a soul so shattered that the weight of the item that entered his existence was too much for him to bear. He now rides in the echo rather than the cab. His face, or a similar image, can be seen in window reflections, mirrors, and the gleam of chrome in the moonlight. When your eyes get heavy, as you start to nod off at an unnamed truck stop with no other rigs parked, his voice murmurs in Portuguese. You might even have dreams about him, or about being him. As the sun never rises, the driver stares down an interminable road with a taut face and tight skin. Because this curse does just that. You don't die from it. You are erased. Additionally, no one remains to ask inquiries after you are deleted. Nobody will miss you. Nobody to recall you as more than a dying whisper about a driver who went out one night and never returned. Drivers claim that the temperature lowers by 15 degrees as soon as you pull into a rest spot that is tucked away amid canyons and sagebrush close to the Nevada border. The vending machines are said to be inoperable. That your AM radio static is matched by the buzz of the lights above the restroom. It's said that if you listen closely enough, you can hear the crunch of gravel beneath unseen tires. Additionally, you might notice a second pair of headlights behind you if you're stupid enough to glance into the side mirror just once before you pull away. However, a car won't be present, only light and quiet. The path will feel different after that, longer, wider. Despite the potholes, it's a bit too smooth. Despite the moon, the night grew darker. Despite the clock, the time was slower. You'll question whether you're lost, but your instincts will tell you that this is the correct course of action. You've spent your entire life behind the wheel. You simply were unaware that it had a name. You will know if you continue on beyond the second turnoff that wasn't on your route, the third gas station that has no attendants, and the fourth motel that has a single car in the lot and no light in the lobby. Without a voice, without a sign, without a sound, you are no longer alone. Due to the Corpo Secco riding once more, through you, alongside you, like you. Additionally, you won't recall the moment you no longer felt fear, because you won't have anything left to fear by then, just the road. The only sound is the rumble of tires over cracked pavement. Night after night, mile after mile, just the sound of somebody breathing quietly behind your ear, until you can no longer remember your name. Until you lose sight of the person you are driving for. Until you lose sight of your original destination. And when a driver, a novice, exhausted, and bewildered on his first long haul, drives by your trailer on a back road in Arkansas, Arizona, or perhaps just outside of Amarillo, and he sees your face through your window, he will discuss it with someone, regarding your eyes' hollowness, about the way your mouth was open, like if it were attempting to communicate, about how he thought you looked familiar for a split second, and word will get out about that narrative, your story. The legend will gain a new verse, one more link in the chain, because one soul is not necessary for the Corpo Secco. It requires a path, a road paved with sorrow and driven by the loneliness of the journey. Furthermore, the road is never deserted, not for very long. Raymond was taken by something that feeds on emptiness. But the next story is about a force that doesn't forgive those who destroy innocence. Click now and meet the woman in white, the entity summoned when a woman is murdered, and her blood cries out for vengeance.